It's meeting of the Town Hall Building Committee, March 10th, 2022. It's about 7:34 in the evening. You do a roll call. If I say your first name, if you say a whole name and here, that would be great. Carolyn?
Carolyn Coffey here.
Josiah?
Josiah Stevenson here.
Mark?
Mark Cameron here.
Gert?
Gert Lubitz here.
And Phil Lear here. Thank you. Two things on the top we have is updating on the CPC and then the capital budget. Gert, sounds like you did a fabulous job at the CPC with the presentation. You want to recap that a little bit for us?
Sure. And I sent around an email to a few of us who were in just sort of recapping the conversation. I CC'd you on that, Phil. Just sort of the general takeaways that we had from the meeting with CPC is that I would categorize CPC as supportive to possibly very supportive of this project. A couple of things that were flagged for us as part of our conversation. Sort of one was thinking about the timing of the request for the approval of our project. And this is more an optical piece, but think that there's a sense that the citizens of the town think about the spring town meeting as sort of the town meeting that we have, and that major projects that are subject to approval are rightfully raised at that point for approval, and that we have to be at least mindful of the fact that there's some subset of the population that may consider putting a major initiative, which this project certainly would fall as a major initiative, on the ballot in a November meeting, and so having something that would be raised to the town in November that would be considered a major project, I think that's something that we can manage around, but it just is going to require communications. And so one of the points that was discussed was that we should be very mindful of the way that we communicate to the town, that when we come for spring and asking for some money, that this is part of a larger project, and we expect to seek full approval at a special meeting in November. Again, I don't think that it's sort of a major issue that's insurmountable, but I do think it's something for us to bear in mind as we think about our communication plan and making sure that people are aware of the fact that we're going to be looking for full approval in November.
Greg, can I interrupt you a second? Did that come from? Did that come from that board?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember who actually specifically raised that point. I don't know, Carolyn or Mark, if you remember who was the one who raised it, but it was a member of the board. Mm-hmm. Oh no, wait, no, actually, you're right. Actually, no, Phil, I think it was somebody who was sitting in from advisory who raised that point.
Mike Dick.
Yes.
Mike
Dickey.
No, Mike Dickey's on CPC, and it wasn't he. I don't think. Who would have been sitting in from advisory? Oh, Gene Dippold. No,
Gene was sitting in from
first selectman.
Yeah. I don't remember who it was, but it was somebody from advisory. Now that you mention it, Phil, it wasn't actually somebody from CPC itself.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I just asked because it doesn't sound like something CPC would bring up.
Yeah, well,
it wasn't really CPC related. It was just somebody's individual observation, and Russ chimed in saying, I don't know why they call it a special town meeting because we do them every year.
Exactly.
But the point is well taken that we would be well served to give a detailed update at annual town meeting to set expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought.
Yeah, and the second point was actually something that was also not raised by CPC itself, but by Jean, who was sitting in for select board. And so her point was raised in response to a point that we had mentioned about seeking full approval for the project at a November meeting would set us up nicely from a construction perspective in terms of being able to get sort of ducks in a row and things ready for a spring sort of kickoff of construction. Her concern that she raised was that perhaps we should be, or at least mindful of the fact that if we need to obtain any sort of override or debt exclusion, that is something that's then going to have to go to a subsequent ballot initiative. And so just because we had been operating under the assumption that we were going to be able to fit this project in under the current budget plan, if it turns out that we're unable to do so, and we do require some sort of a debt exclusion or Prop 2.5 override, that's going to be something that impacts the timing of the schedule, and we need to build in some buffer, or at least to think about that as far as the project plan. And I think that was actually something that was raised on the agenda for a discussion point later today. But I actually thought that was a very good point for us to keep in mind, and certainly not something that I think that.
Yeah, no, it is a good point. I'm not sure that's going to be determined by us, but we have to be aware that. I don't know. I don't want to say that we need to sell it more or anything like that, but it really depends on how the finance director and capital budget decide to make this work out.
Yeah,
It does get tricky though. It's an easy move from annual town meeting to voting because the elections are held in the spring. So they would have to have a special ballot initiative when we go in the fall, if it is a debt exclusion. So it just something to keep in mind. Town hall would need to make sure they're on, that they know that and are on board with it. It was an interesting observation, something that we hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final sort of key takeaway, and there were a lot of things we talked about, but I think these are the 3 points that I think were sort of really worth relaying to this to the rest of this committee, was actually related to the budget itself and the amount that we'd be seeking specifically from CPC. I know in our minds and in all of the sort of communications that we've had previously on this topic is that we've sort of been pegged to like the $4 million figure as funds that would potentially be obtainable from CPC. Russ was really encouraging us to not be beholden to that $4 million figure, but to instead think about sort of what amounts were properly attributable to the historic town hall structure. And so to the extent that we came up with a number that exceeded that $4 million figure, he was encouraging of our group to basically come up with a number that's in excess of $4 million. He didn't sort of put any parameters around that, but the sense that I got from him was that we should be thinking about coming up with whatever number we think is sort of like, it has to be reasonable. And we have to be able to reasonably tie it to historic town hall. But to the extent it is reasonable, shoot for the moon. And if we aim too high, it's not like they're going to just reject us out of hand and say, sorry, you guys now lose. It's more like, well, we see that you guys asked for X. We think X is a little bit too high, and we're willing to offer you, some amount less than X. Which I think was just important as we're thinking about what the overall funding mechanisms for this project, that we shouldn't necessarily think about $4 million as, well, I don't think we should think about $4 million as something that's a given at this point, but I also don't think that we should necessarily think about it as a cap. That I think that, there is an opportunity for potentially more than $4 million is at the end of the day where we are.
So we wouldn't have the contractor give a price for what the renovation is and what the new is and tied to that, or is that too risky for us? Like it might be lower.
Well, no, we have that now.
Well, no, we can,
I mean, right,
but what we can, what we would do is we would have to have an allocated breakout before we even have a contractor. Right, so, because we need to get the funding before we have the contract, right?
Sure.
And then we've got to understand exactly within the rules of what we can and cannot attribute to Old Town Hall. I mean, obviously, it's a given that the direct work, the actual construction work is attributed. We've got to understand what percentage, how we can, what are the rules are for then applying the site work that's related to it. Should we take the site work on the whole property and proportionately apply it for square footage? Because that's part of the job, right? And then all the soft costs. So we've got to understand what costs, because from what I understand, there's specific CPC rules that are governed by the state or put out there by the state. So we need to just make sure that whatever those rules are, that we're following those rules. And if it literally is just the direct work, which I would be surprised if it was, at least the design and OPM associated soft costs would be able to be allocated to that. And then in the end, if it ends up being cheaper, we just maybe don't get reimbursed for that as much if it ends up being cheaper. We still have to prove it after we spend it. It seemed like a two-step mechanism there. We get it pre-approved for it, we do it, we spend it. If we go over, probably most likely our problem. If we go under, we'll only get what we spent. We won't get what we were promised and say we have extra money to spend somewhere else.
Okay.
That's how I understood it from what we had there. I think just
Yeah.
the biggest.
Yeah, and I think
unknown was what
in
the
addition
rules
to
are.
even just some of the soft costs, Mark, I think that there's, there are reasonable cases that we can look at things like systems, right? So HVAC and elevators that service both buildings, that, there's some sort of way to allocate that, and whether it's done by square footage, whether it's based off of overall project costs. And it sounds like that's where there's a little bit of gray area in terms of how do you allocate the costs for some of this stuff. Those are not direct construction costs that are directly being spent on the historic town hall, but all of those things could potentially be allocated, at least a portion of them be allocated to the historic town hall.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I think certainly those that are putting the numbers together are familiar with CPC, but it's going to be up to us to review those. And kind of depends on who's on that CPC board too.
Well, I don't think they do know the rules. I think we got to dig into this because it from the conversation, it seemed very open-ended, very agreeable. I think we need to really dig into it, because if we don't dig into it and we don't follow the rules, somebody else likely will. And we would hate to be in a position where we did something by accident that was not correct because we didn't have the right information.
Yep, good point.
So I think it's up to us to make sure that we figure out what the rules are.
Okay, cool. So Gert, you were pretty happy with that presentation?
Yeah, no, I thought that it was overall was a very positive meeting, was my takeaway. Yeah.
Well received.
Yeah. As opposed to the next topic on our.
Well, no, I just make a comment about Russ. He's been very supportive. I told him he couldn't retire from his position until we got this thing off the ground. He's been through this so many times, like some other people on the board have. So that's good. Well, thank you very much for doing that and reporting on it. Mark, you want to talk about capital budget presentation?
It was stellar.
How do you spell stoic? I'm taking notes here.
So I wouldn't say it was as promising and successful as CPC, but you know, we reviewed the budget of where we were at.
Mhm.
We gave them a brief overview of where the project was at. They were very anxious to see the numbers, so before we could even finish presenting the rest of it, they clawed into the numbers, and so we looked at the numbers. You know, I think there was a little bit of sticker shock there in terms of the value. And I think
Let's just back up though and say there were only 3 of them there.
Okay,
Yeah.
So, and one was quiet, Brian was supportive, and Mike Dick was the third.
Correct.
okay. Yeah, Mike likes to ask a lot of questions, which he's good at.
Mike thinks this is too expensive for the town. And he thought that last time around as well. So we answered a lot of his questions. But you know, at the end of the day, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get him comfortable. Susan Franklin was there. She was okay. Brian articulated the 4 things that he thought needed to happen from the last go around, and that the top 3 had all been achieved. And the 4th one, I think, was the financial plan. And that's right. And that's what we're working on. So, so he was Brian.
or what we're asking them to work on.
Yeah, exactly. So Brian was, I thought, very supportive, and he actually was articulated all of the things that we did at many of which at his request, as far as trying to see if we move treasurer collector down to the basement, shrink the building, you know, and went through all those exercises, and he came to the conclusion that the building that we have is, you know, the best option. So he did corroborate that for Susan and Mike, which was good.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful to have had Brian participate in so many of our meetings, because I think there's a concern, and I wouldn't say it's limited to members of the Capital Budget Committee, but I've heard it sort of echoed from other groups, that there's a concern that maybe we haven't been diligent enough in our considerations of the decisions that we're making, and that, oh well, have you thought about this, or have you really, like, do we really need all of these things? And you know, I know that we have. I know that, you know, this is not sort of a project where there's a lot of fat to trim. You know, I think given the marching orders that we have to build, to put a building on the common that blends in with the old town hall, I just don't think there's any way to make this project be an $11 million project, which seems to be what everybody wants it to be. And yeah, would I like it to be an $11 million project? Of course I would. But if you want these other things, then you're going to have to pay for those other things. And then it becomes a decision, well, do these other things matter? Or do we then basically say it doesn't matter enough and we're going to do something else? And if people say that they're not going to pay for it, then we're back to the drawing board, and we're looking at sort of basically like a trailer park on 3A, right? I mean, like that's sort of where we are. But people, I don't think that's really what people want to do. What they really say they want to do is they want to have what we've offered, but they want to cost $11 million. And I think they think that they can get it if they're a little, if everybody's really diligent and careful about all the costs that are and the decisions that are being made throughout the design process. And I think that what we really have to convey to people is that we have, like, we're asking these questions. You're not the only one who has these questions. Like, take a look at the drawings. Like, I thought it was really helpful when we were able to, we spent, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes walking through the floor plans and the schematics of the building, because one of the questions that came up was like, oh, well, you know, we remember before there were these meandering hallways that didn't really seem to go places. And we're like, well, let's talk about the floor plans. Here they are. And they looked at them, and all of a sudden everybody had a chance to see them. And they were like, wow, they didn't really have any questions because they couldn't really poke any holes in the design. Sort of like, yeah, you can maybe like quibble about a few square feet here or there, but it doesn't move the dial on the project costs. anyway, I thought that was a really effective part of the meeting. And that was, Mike had a lot of questions leading up to that. After we went through those parts of the plans, I think he sort of felt like, I don't have as many holes to poke in this project as I thought I had. So just something to keep in mind for us as we need to talk about this project to other groups and other people, that I think that when they actually sit down and they see what's been done, there's not a lot to sort of raise issues with.
But I think it's good for us to think about these things when we are putting together our information presentations and that sort of thing for annual town meeting or, any other forum, because as can be the case with anything, when you've been close to something, you just kind of know that that's the way it's supposed to be. And to your point, Kurt, not everyone is going to know how deliberate we've been with our decision making. So we need to remember to work some of those processes into our explanations, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that one of the takeaways I took for myself out of that was maybe, again, as we will re-engage in these financial conversations, is pulling out the cost of what it costs to renovate the existing building and kind of truing that up to not just $2022, but $2023, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have, because it's probably at this point been almost a year since we even looked at that. And we as a committee have all crossed that option off the list because, we know there's a correlation between the two sets of costs climbing at relatively the same rate in terms of cost to do the work. So if we just take that and we true that up to the $2023 so that people can understand and see what that is, because that'll likely come up. And I feel like we would be kind of caught flat-footed if we were, well, what's that going to cost? And we're all thinking of the numbers that we saw a year or two ago, right? So I think it would just help us to have that ammunition in our back pocket.
I agree, and also because of the.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say I agree, and I think because that actually did come up, and we were asked, well, what were the numbers when you looked at it? And the numbers, we're not comparing apples to apples anymore, right? Like, to your point, Jason or Mark, we've got it's a different set of numbers that are now outdated, and if we're talking about doing this in summer of 2023, what do those numbers look like? It's no longer, what was the number, $10.5 million, something like that we were previously looking at. It was
a little under 10. Jason and I looked at it recently, and I think we came up with roughly 11.5 for today. So, and obviously you could probably just round it up to 12 for next year. But I don't know if it's worth asking the engineering department to actually get real updated numbers, or whether we just take the numbers from I think things are maybe so different in the marketplace. It may even be worth doing that if they can get them updated instead of just applying escalations. What we did was use Turner's escalation.
Yeah, but if we kind of also price it from what they were to what both were then to what they're both are now, that'll give us a pretty good idea, right, in terms of what the escalation has been or what it's looking like.
Yeah, although that probably only covers the construction costs, right? So there are other costs that we've incurred along the way now. We're well into the design process. And, so, there may be some other costs that we have to attribute, because like if we shifted to all of a sudden doing a renovation at this point, we'd be not back to square one, but we haven't done any of the sort of fine tuning of plans to do that. So there would be additional costs that we'd have to think about that would be in addition to construction costs, right? So we need to make sure that that's accounted for somewhere too.
Great. There's some great points there. A lot to think about for our future presentations, particularly to the public. Good stuff there that came out of this. Anything else on capital budget? Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing I would just flag is that I don't want it to come across as though the meeting was too negative, because I came away from it with a positive feeling, even though we received a lot of pushback and a lot of questions. But the thing that left me feeling good about it was that we had answers for the questions that were raised. And that I felt like they were actually addressing the questions that were raised, and that so it wasn't like, sort of we were, oh geez, I don't know, we need to get back to you on that. There were points that, like, it really did bring home to me that I think we have been diligent throughout this process, and as a result, I felt actually sort of comforted by that fact, even though it was an uncomfortable meeting at times, but it was overall, I thought it was a worthwhile meeting, and we need to have those conversations with people who may not be, sort of automatic supporters of it.
Totally agree with you.
Great. Yeah. Well, we've got one of our greatest proponents is Brian, and he's been critically supportive of us to make sure that we do what we need to do to get this in the right spot. And I think we've done a very good job of that. And we're at that point, and now we're getting scrutinized on our presentations, and we're able to answer the questions. So it's a good thing. I think we're in a good place, or as good a place as we could be. I'll say that. Mark, were you going to say something else on capital?
No, I'm good.
Thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. Great. Finalized dollar amount for construction manager firm. Does anybody know anything different than the 200,000 that John threw out there? I don't have anything.
No, I just would just add that I think that that's a conservatively high number. I don't think that.
Yeah, his first number was 150, and then he goosed it to 200 to be safe.
Yep.
Oh, the only other, sorry, just to go back, speaking of the 200, the only other thing that came from capital budget was kind of just a conversation that existed around where the 200 could come from. And it really didn't have closure to it, because we didn't understand if, as a group, if the 200 could be pulled from the 7 or 750. I forget which, I can never remember if it's 7 or 750, but whatever was allocated in special town meeting special town meeting in November. And if that money could be used to fund this ask for 200, my gut would say, because I think that was worded, or the expectation there was that wouldn't be used unless the project received full funding. But could we, when we go to town hall, when we go to town meeting, could we vote to use 200 of that 700? It's like voting again. So again, there wasn't closure there.
Okay.
So I think we just need to understand the rules of the road here and what we got to do, because it's a different conversation if it can come from that than if they have to allocate separate monies for us.
Right. Brian was going to look into the language that was in the warrant last time around.
He did mention that to me. I was hoping he'd have that answer. the warrant doesn't specify that, but I clearly remember Chris presenting it as a contingent on approval of the whole plan to be able to use that, tap into that 750. So did you ask capital specifically for 200,000?
We did not ask. We gave them an expectation that we would be asking, and we gave them that rough figure.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, apparently there was a conversation between Brian and Chris where I think that Chris had given some like sort of the initial response was, oh, well, they need $200,000. We'll just take it out of the 750 that was approved in November without sort of any real examination of whether or not that was possible. So that was sort of the initial reaction to the idea that we'd be looking for $200,000. But then as we were discussing it a little bit more in detail, I think there was a sense that this is something that we need to look into, and we need to figure out whether or not there's separate budget item that needs to come out of this in addition to whether we can take this out of the 750 and then basically knock that 750 down to 550, or whether or not this is actually a whole separate allocation for $200,000 that then would require some additional budget as well.
And how I assume you made the conversation of being able to recoup this money through savings. How did that conversation go, and how was it accepted?
The conversation went well. It was accepted, but the only thing that's tricky about it is if the project doesn't ultimately get funded, then we've prepaid this money and there's no opportunity for it to be recouped. So I think they understood why we're asking for it and the logic behind it. But there's still that potential disruption.
Yeah, I got the sense, specifically from Mike Dick, that he sort of was asking, well, you're coming in asking us for some additional money, but you don't even have approval for the project. We're going to wind up approving more money for it. We still don't know what the townspeople feel about it. It's almost like, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? Where people want to know what the final project's going to cost, but you can't know what the final project's going to cost until you get people to work on it and identify the problems, come up with plans, come up with engineering teams, all this sort of stuff. And then you can tell them what it's going to cost. And then maybe they're going to choke on the price tag, but like you can't actually do any of that until you've spent a few $100,000 already. And there's no other way there's no way to avoid it that I'm aware of, unless you can find some firms that are willing to do all this stuff sort of, gratis until they're able to get a project approved at the end of the day. But I can't imagine anybody would do that.
Yeah, and I think they were fairly receptive to those comments that we had to state that this is the process. This is the process we have to go down in order to get to where you're asking us the information you're asking for. So this is part of that process. So I think that was received.
Okay. Good. Anything else that I missed on that? I'm not sure we can. A couple other things Michelle has put down on here is community outreach plans to educate the public. I'm guessing that starts after May for the summer. We'll get together with Tucker and put together some plans for that.
Although we are going to want to do something at annual town meeting.
Oh, you had mentioned that. Did that come from us or did that come from?
No, I mean, that's just a suggestion. I mean, we would have to, ask for the floor for, for a few minutes, but I think it would be wise.
I just think that the last town meeting that we did there, or the one that we did last spring, where we had the video that played, I thought that was great, because then we don't have to, we can rehearse it. We can just, you know, we can do it. We can go up there, we can play it, and we can be there to support it. I actually thought that was really great. And I think that would give us an opportunity to have more rehearsed and more well thought out and less, okay, I'm on stage of annual town meeting and now I've got to talk in front of all these giant people. I don't know, it seemed to work well.
Yeah, there's no reason why we can't do a video presentation again.
Yeah. Because I don't know, I mean, I don't know where I even saw it. I saw something somewhere that was alluding to that maybe in the future that these town meetings can be engaged remotely. So I'm not sure, you know, again, how that's changing and evolving, but there's been chatter in the past that people feel that they're excluded because of the timing. People with kids, they can't go. Only one person from the household can go. So anyway.
Okay. Okay, so along with the ask, we got to put together a video. I think video presentation is fine. I think that's a great way to go. And I suspect those running the town meeting would like it too, because we're going to tell them that we've got a 4-minute video and they know exactly how long it's going to be. And, you know, that's sort of the end of it. I'm sure we'd have to be present to ask respond to any questions that may be asked.
Yeah, and I've next to me here, I've got the budget here that Steve Kirby sent over that I was looking at.
Yeah.
You know, just a thought here, you know, as we go to special town meeting there and might be worthy of presenting this budget, you know, after we get a chance to clean this up and go through it and really be comfortable with it, with what's on there and making sure that everything's covered, that we present that at annual town meeting before, or annual town meeting before we ask for the pre-construction money. Because I mean, instinctively, this is what we're asking. We're not trying to trick anybody. We're trying to be open about where we're at. This is where we think it's going to cost. This is part of the process, and this is the money that we're looking for now to get to the next step. And you know, being as transparent with everybody as we can. I mean, if we go in and say it's a $13 million job and come back 6 months later and say it's a $15 million job, we're going to be judged. I mean, people. So I think that presenting that to the folks will help them see it. We can break it down so that it's not just one big, massive number. We don't have to show maybe as much detail that's on this. We can kind of roll things up because this is 2 pages of budgets, but we can go through it and they can understand the detail and the logic that go behind it versus just one massive number that they can't comprehend how we got there.
Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts? I mean, it's an area of transparency and maybe taking away sticker shock for the fall.
Well, we can't just tell them what they want to hear. We have to tell them the truth. I mean, that's what it's about. You know, nobody wants whether, and if we were telling them it was 12 million, they'd want it to be 9. So it's all,
Yep.
you know, it's all relative, but it is what it is. And we have to show what it is, and we have to show it as best as we can. And I think the detail that we can show only helps us. You know, it shows what we've considered. You know, it shows there's contingency money. It shows what there is for contingency money.
Not that I'm looking for a vote, but everybody else agree with that we should present the budget at the May town meeting? Or a likeness of it?
Yeah.
I think it's worth playing around with and see, you know, I think if we can adequately explain it in the 4-minute allocation, that sort of thing, then it's not a bad way to go. If it ends up leaving more questions than answers, then maybe more vagueness would be better. We can always remind people of the state of the market and our expectation that the number is going to be higher. But I do think transparency is great. And, as long as we can adequately explain it, then yes.
Henley, did you touch?
I don't know if he's allowed to, but John would do a very good job of this type of presentation. He sells quite well. And he answers very good. Josiah, any thoughts?
No, I just think transparency is good, and everything out there to get the response so that we can prepare next time for it is also a good thing. So more information, better, more response, and our ability to deal with it.
Cool. All right, great. Thank you. Let's see. Annual town meeting, request funds to hire construction manager. Fall town meeting, request full. Remaining funding for project. Fall winter 22 special ballot election and debt exclusion, if debt exclusion is required. That's what Carolyn had mentioned.
Yeah, so we got some clarity on that at that meeting, and I think it can I'll be generous to say it can easily happen. Whether it will be welcomed open arms is another question, but from a process standpoint, it seems like it's not impossible. But it is something to be considered. And I think we're more than likely at this point, with where the dollar value is at and going, that debt exclusion is probably more than likely.
Yeah. So are you just hearing that, or did Capel mention that, or is that from?
No, in our meeting with capital budget, we I think it was Gene who had said that if it requires a debt exclusion, then it needs to be voted on, but the vote can happen. It just would need to be set up as a separate vote. So like Carolyn said, if we asked for money at a May town meeting, that it's easy because there's the election in June to follow. If we do it,
I believe there has to be 2 weeks in between the town meeting and the election. And I don't know why, but I don't know why I think that, but I think I'm remembering that from the last time. So.
and if we go for full funding in November, then we obviously have to have an election subsequently thereafter, which is again leading into it. That complicates it. We didn't even talk about the fact that it leads into the holidays, but it just seemed, it's conceptually possible. It's just, I don't know how well received or liked it would be, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be what it's got to be, right? I mean, we're giving ourselves a little more time to the summer here to get more of our ducks in a row.
Yeah, and I mean, we explained the logic of how the November works, regardless of what year it is. It's just a November timeframe versus a May, June approvals. Works much better for the project.
Yeah. Got it. Let's hope we're not talking about May and June this coming November. That would be, it's already 3 years November, so. Long haul. Thank you on that.
Okay.
Another note she has here is to discuss use for auditorium space to help with the project. You know, Tucker has done a little bit of reaching out. I mean, that's an area of concern for me, because I don't think we've got anything in our budget to really update anything to do with the stage. Lighting and so forth, stuff like that. I'm not sure how it works, but there should be or there could be. In fact, one of our charges was to see if we could use what do they call it, private public funding. So we could find somebody to do a part of the project. I don't know how that works, but I would think that'd be a good way to get other groups engaged with us. You know, whether we could find, I'm not sure Drama Club has the money, but you know, there might be other groups like the Music Circus who do have money. Maybe they could fund a new lighting system or something like that. That should be something that we should be considering if none of that is in our budget now. I don't see any of that in our budget, and it's a bit of a concern. I don't want us walking into the old auditorium and have it just painted and still have the heat pipes and the squeaky floors and what 50 or 60-year-old lighting system that's in there now with wires hanging down everywhere. I guess the curtains do get replaced because they're have asbestos in them and they're not allowed to use those anymore. But it doesn't appear to have a lot of updating going on in there. So whether we can get a private partnership in there to help us with that, I think that'll be key to try to coordinate that so that when we do get done, that we can encourage other groups to come in. Have not seen the acoustic report yet. I don't know what is with that, but Michelle and I and Natalie met the fellow there that did the acoustical testing on the hall. And just
Michelle has her hand up.
oh, Michelle, can we hear you?
No,
Keep talking and see if it starts.
Okay, so I do
Oh.
have the acoustic report that I can send along to everybody.
Great, we heard you. How what did we spend? $3,000 for that? One of the takes in conversation with the engineer that was doing the testing was finding a space to put sound absorbing material, and he talked about panels and so forth and so on. And in the ceiling, there is above the ornate curves on the side, there is a big rectangular section that's separate from everything else, where the 4 or 6 lights hang down from. And in talking with him, it sounded like that would be an ideal place to put an acoustical or a sound absorbing material up there. And he mentioned, I think, 3 different ones, like 3 different price ranges, and went anywhere from, I think, 75,000. We were guessing square footage, 75,000 to 200,000.
Wow.
But that would make all the difference in the world for that hallway. And that's when you get some of these other groups to come in to actually use it. So, I mean, I don't see that in our budget, but if we can present it in such a way that we can get a private organization on board to take something like that and maybe a new LED lighting system, that would be much safer than what's there. I think that's something we should pursue, and work with Tucker on that, and whoever else is willing to go after it. But I'd be disappointed if that hardwood floor stayed there. Natalie said that they would shore it up, But I don't know if any of you have been in any of those performances, but boy, you cannot sneak anywhere in that hall when there's a performance going on. The floor is so noisy. When you go to use the bathrooms or down the hall where they're just so squeaky. And I don't see an easy fix by, whatever, putting screws underneath it or adding glue to it or whatever. I don't think, I don't know. I'm not sold on that, but maybe there's a way to quiet that down so that it'd be acceptable. I'd love to keep the old hardwood floor, absolutely, but man, is it noisy. So those are maybe some considerations in the auditorium part of the project. And again, we have a chance with Mark and Wayne and Josiah to sit down and go through the plans. We'll be able to see what's included and not included that. And maybe we can make up a wish list and get together with Tucker and see if we can find a solution and, involve Lisa Pratt and whoever else from other outside groups that may want to come in and review this and make it a better project than, what's on paper right now. Some of my thoughts. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Well, one thought that comes to mind is, the obviously the price tag of this whole project and the fact that the auditorium space in this project is going to has a large square footage, and it's part of our charge and intent to preserve that auditorium space. And I think that we lack that functional use in there. Other than the drama club, dramatic club, whatever it's called appropriately, but I think that we don't have a lot of uses in there. And I feel that there's people that'll have the perception of how much money we're spending on the project as a whole. That square footage could be used for, let's say, office space and alleviate and create a much different project than we currently have in front of us. And I think that, especially if we then start to consider putting more money into the auditorium to a space that doesn't have a use, I think we need to make that program a little bit more robust.
Remember though, that the town is responsible for voting areas, and it represents 2 precincts for voting, which is not to say that they couldn't co-opt the gymnasium, in one of the schools to do it, but it does complicate things to do that. And so having it in town hall is helpful.
So,
But you
I
also
think
raise
that's-
another point, which is I don't know, like, again, looking into what the charter is or what the rules are, maybe some of the upgrades to restore the building and make it more useful could fall under the purview of the CPC funding. I don't know whether, the acoustical tiles that would make that room more useful or updated lighting, whether that is something that maybe CPC is able to help with. It's in Old Town Hall. It's part of the restoration and making the auditorium more useful, but it's a thought, something to ask about anyway. But I think
Yeah, I mean,
the
we can,
idea of getting feedback from organizations that might use the space is a great way to do it, because that's also the way to plant the seed for public-private partnerships and, getting, other people to think about whether they can, A, what's important, and B, other ways of creatively making things happen.
Yeah. And, back to touch on the voting thing. Yes. I mean, people may say, well, we only vote there every so often. It's not that big of a deal. But if it means impacting the schools, or, there's no school that day, people might feel differently.
Mhm.
People might feel differently. People might feel that they don't want the school to be taken over for voting purposes. I mean, we have to vote somewhere. I mean, we can still vote, we can still do mail-in ballots, but that's seemingly to become more common. But I think it's a long time before the actual physical voting station goes away. And it's, maybe that has some draw, like, okay, well, now there's a beneficial use. You stay over there. Don't come over to the schools. And, again, I think if we can find, I think it would just help our case more and more if we could find uses, actual organizations and functions for that. I don't know if rec is something that could even have a function there in some way, shape, or form. If there's, if we can have the ability to use it for town training, whether it be through the fire department, police department, because it's an open space, right? So
It's also set up to be a large meeting room, if there,
yes, but
if there is a controversial topic and the select board can meet down there and stuff.
yeah, but it's an awkward size because it's too big to have any typical meeting. It's too big to have any typical Board of Select meeting in there, but it's also not large enough to have a special town meeting or an annual town meeting. So it's kind of that weird size.
But for example, when they were putting, when there was a suggestion that there was going to be a windmill put in on 3A, planning board met in that room because that many people were showing up to contribute, so when there are controversial topics, meetings can be held there.
So again, I think if we could put a list, if each person on the committee could put a list of things together that space can be used for, and even examples like that, Carolyn, to just help us, put the framework of why do we need this space? Why is it even needed? And have a good case to present as to why that space is needed. And then in terms of the scope in there, I think that, I welcome everybody on the committee to provide their feedback on what's wrong with that space. Now that Phil has drilled in how terrible and noisy the floors are. I mean, I kind of always, I think of an old house having squeaky floors. So you deal with it. You don't like it, don't buy an old house. Don't go in an old house. But if it's really that bad where it really limits the use of it and it really impacts it, then we should create a list so that we can talk with Johnson Roberts about this list and understand, okay, what's going to be fixed on the list and what's not going to be fixed on the list. And then, it's really an alignment of expectations. And I don't think you have to have a construction or a architecture background to know that the floors in there squeak and the acoustics are terrible and the place is hot as can be. So just if we all write a list of what we're expecting that building, that space to have, we can go through that. And again, it's similar to just even expand on that, anything related to the renovation work. I think the new work is much simpler in terms of expectations and levels of finish and so forth and so on. But when it comes to the old building, like what are we doing with the windows? That was a topic of what are we doing with the windows? So we should, we fairly know.
Yeah, when
we'll
are we
probably get a
making
typical-
decisions on that?
We'll probably get a typical, double hung window or something in the new town hall. But what are we doing about old town hall? What's our plan there?
So there's some great points there. So I think, in the voting, the Situate closes down their high school on the day that they vote. They don't have school that day. That's how it impacts Situate.
But when we vote, obviously, when we vote on election day is always a Tuesday.
Yep.
But when we have our town elections, they're on Saturdays, right?
Yep.
So that wouldn't affect. You could conceivably always do it. Again, I guess that creates another hurdle for the town to manage
Yep.
the voting booths and everything going back and forth between two different facilities. You know, and maybe we, again, we can get that granular. I mean, if this stuff, like,
Yeah, it's just a point of comparison. I know the Situate
Yeah.
closed for the day.
no, but
You
it's
guys have
helpful.
mentioned
Though.
not to
But
interfere
someone's
with
going to
the
say,
class of
well, we
school.
don't have to close the school because we vote on Saturdays. So what's the big deal? Like,
Yeah,
if elect,
in November every year, there's an election.
so do we vote every November? We don't vote
Yeah.
every November.
Yeah.
We do.
You might not, but there is an election.
I feel like I don't vote
every November.
So yeah, a couple other things on the auditorium quickly. Just, Tucker had looked into this quite a bit, and I don't know if you recall, but I was quite astounded and disappointed when I heard him say at one of our meetings last spring now, that there were groups that would not come in and perform in our auditorium because of the acoustics in the room. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that Rusty Skippers had refused to play in there, and that the other groups related to Music Circus weren't interested because of that problem. So that's a discussion we can continue with Tucker. So when Michelle and I were standing in the middle of the auditorium talking with Natalie, and this guy was working the sound in the back corner, Michelle is sitting there with her foot, and she's just going like this, and it's going squeak, 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 right in the middle of hardwood floor. She moved out of the way, I moved out of the way, and I stepped on a squeaky floor, on the squeaky board. So it's kind of prominent, and it's one of those things that would bother me if you were paying for a big project like this and ended up with something like that. It might be a disappointment. It's kind of drills down to a pretty fine point, but we do want to make other groups comfortable and use it, and we should pursue an avenue with that. I'd like to hear what Tucker has to say, because he's done some research and talked to some of these other groups. So we'll get him back involved in that. And I think some of these, Mark, I think this list that you mentioned is a great idea. Will come out of some of that will come out of our sit down and review of the plans. We'll be aware of exactly what is being done in the auditorium, what's not being done in the auditorium. And the windows, I haven't heard any talk about the windows. We should be talking to the historic commissions. It seems like fairly soon. I think we talked about the spring doing this. And I don't know quite what to tell them. We can certainly show them the outside pictures, but if they start asking about the windows and the doors and stuff, I really don't know. I don't know any details.
Shouldn't we follow a similar process to what you guys did for the church?
I think
What the options are and
it worked
present
out.
them?
Yeah, it worked out great. Absolutely great.
Yeah.
I just feel like we need information. I don't know if we've decided on the windows. I don't recall that. We've changed the
think so.
design of a couple in the stairwell. Thanks to Gert's great idea coming from the front of the town hall, but the actual style of the window, or whether the thermopane insulated, or whether they open or don't open, that type of thing, I don't know. And those are all questions we have to have answered to go before the two different commissions.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a recommendation, but they may recommend otherwise, but we should probably know what our choices are and I remember they put together you could do this, that, or the other thing, and it'll cost you, this, this plus and this plus. But I don't recollect that we ever said, oh, well, then we should definitely go down this path. But I may be
I
wrong.
thought in the old building they carried fixing up the windows and putting in an interior storm, which was kind of I wouldn't say cheap solution, but it's historically correct, at least. I thought that was what they said they carried, and
I
that's
think
the
they had,
prices that were.
I forget what they exactly priced, but they had priced something and alluded that there were options that they were still pursuing. And I don't think they
If-
really,
It's just
There's
really
an
hard to be
interior-
historic and meet the energy code.
Yeah, is, if there's an interior storm, do they become non-functional?
I think they said it was an interior storm that they could adjust. It's been a long time, right? So,
So again, I mean, it's just worth having that conversation again.
Yeah.
I think that's probably going to be something that the historic groups really zero in on.
yeah, so what if we had one specific meeting where we just kind of clawed through the architectural items, the architectural items in Old Town Hall, you know, and again, keeping to architectural and less mechanical, going through those, and if there's anything relevant that of New Town Hall, that would make sense to loop into that conversation, but then we could go through the auditorium space, the windows of Old Town Hall, and then I would also ask the question, are the windows in New Town Hall going to be operable, or would they be non-operable?
The addition would be non-operable.
really?
Well, I think it's all.
I mean, it's a good question to ask. I mean,
I
it's,
think it's all, it all has to do with the air exchange inside, right? I mean,
well, you have to.
Chris
you're
would
gonna
love to have a window that's open, but we're being told that they won't open, that, you know, the air system, the heating and the air recovery, fresh air type setup is all engineered for closed envelope.
Yeah, I
Yikes.
mean, from a commercial fresh air intake, you know, you've got to design assuming that everything's closed. So you got to have the right outdoor air mixture coming in. And again, with things like COVID, that only increased. And engineers tend to hate it when people open windows, because then it has things happen that they don't like to happen. And it you know, somebody's hot in one room and they leave the window open, or they open it, it kind of just makes things do wacky. You lose control on a humidity level. That's why it's just a good question to ask them what they've designed, so that there's a clear level of expectations.
The thing about operable windows is they allow you for ventilation. So if you hermetically seal the building, you have to put ducts and fresh air piping through. Whereas if you just have an operable window, even if it's closed, it counts for air changes.
And that's what we have now, right? We have a separate system for whatever it's called, fresh air.
I actually don't know what we have now.
But yeah, no, we don't have a separate system for fresh air. The fresh air mixes with the mechanical system. There's one system and it mixes.
Okay.
So you have a single outdoor intake, which from a ratio mixes with the rest of the system.
So we've come along with a lot of questions. We found out how much we don't know about our project that we're so far along on.
But I think,
sit down at the drawing, look at the drawings, and answer our questions ourselves, I think.
Absolutely. Yep. I think that's a good start. I love the idea of a meeting where we just talk about the architecture of it again, review all of the design features of it, be able to ask our questions about the doors and windows and the the auditorium area. Sounds good.
so considering that it's almost middle of March and we're probably conceivably 2 months away from May town meeting, should we kind of map out a schedule and what we need to do between now and May to make that what we plan on being able to present at that meeting, what information we feel we need to have for that meeting, and that'll kind of help us figure out what we can do after that meeting, depending on the outcome of it. You know, some of these things could maybe wait until after the meeting. Maybe they're not as pressing related to the meeting.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's a great idea. I'm thinking Vertex would probably help us with that scheduling. Anything else on that? Next thing we have coming up is advisory board is looking for a presentation on March 16th, which is next Wednesday. Looking for somebody to help out with that, and any suggestions to present to them. They're just looking for an update. Mary McGoldrick was in touch with me, and she said nothing specific, just an update. All they're looking for.
It'd be a good idea to present the CM at risk concept and then ask for money for that too, because they will end up having to opine on it.
We want their support. Yeah.
What do you think about working with Vertex to clean up this cost sheet, this project budget, and being able to present this in front of advisory?
That's a good idea. It's nice to have a deadline, make you do it. Not you, but.
I like
Us.
Although it works for me.
But I think, I mean, if today's Thursday, there's no chance that we're gonna get this cleaned up before Wednesday, when we haven't even reached out to Vertex to know that they even, I don't think that's fair to them. So I don't know if maybe we could push off a week with advisory or something, but
we can ask for a text. I mean,
I just think it would be, to make it worthwhile, if we can go through this budget and clean this up with Vertex and have some real back and forth dialogue and conversations and be comfortable with where this is at. Again, we've got a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, we just rattled off a whole list of them. So let's not get bogged down in that, and let's look at this and understand where we're at and be able to present it. And because some of this stuff I can't even make sense of. I don't even, and I can, I can share it.
But what we're asking them to do is to consolidate and simplify the budget, right? As opposed to having 40 different lines, have whatever, 15 different lines.
Well, no, Michelle, can I share? Is that all right? Because, well, I can describe some of what I'm seeing. I mean, and just talking through some of the figures they put on here, they put escalation here, spring of 23, and they've got 9%. I mean, I know we live in crazy world, but that's pretty hefty too, so just understanding the logic there.
That's a lot in your eyes.
I mean, 3% has been average. So yes, 9 is a lot, but yes, we are living in a very uneasy, odd time. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it would help us to be able to understand the logic behind the 9% and be able to talk to advisory about what we're putting in front of them. As I'm looking at Old Town Hall, New Town Hall, and site work, I'm seeing each of them have a 5% design contingency. And then at the bottom, it looks like maybe there's a construction contingency of 8%. So carried across all of that. So Josiah, what do you, I mean, if we're at 50, 60% construction documents, what would you think are the most appropriate levels of contingency on a normal project at this stage of construction?
For design, I would say 5% at the end of design development, so. And 0 at the end of construction documents, so that means somewhere in between,
Okay,
3%.
so 5 is, okay, so 5 is a little strong then. And that's okay.
Maybe. It's just, but you're right, we're in a crazy time. I don't really understand
You
how
know,
the prices are.
construction, we have construction contingency at 8%. Oh, Michelle said I can share now. Hold on. So these were so again, old town hall, new town hall, we've got design. I mean, they also show profit in here, and I would think that would have been,
That
in
in
this
general
number.
conditions, yeah.
but maybe not. And that, and then you get down here and you have construction contingency. I think that might be a little light. I'd probably carry more like 10% there. But then,
Well, okay.
which is not, and it's certainly not far off by any means.
We
but-
we usually average 5, and this is, we know the site, right? We know and there won't be that many unforeseen conditions.
Yeah. And then, contingency on the soft costs. So again, that makes sense. But, just kind of trying to clean this up a little bit. And maybe bundling some of these a little bit, but I think it's also worthy of understanding what we should carry for an owner's contingency, which is a separate line item, not on here. And that's the simple items of, well, we're here, let's why don't we upgrade this? And none of that is in there. If we're looking to upgrade a finish or something, that ideally wouldn't come out of any of those contingencies. That'd be a change. So.
Is it okay if I initiate a email with Vertex tomorrow and CC you, Mark, and Michelle, and see what how they might respond?
Yeah, and even if we do it as our next meeting, our next town hall meeting, where we as a group, we go through it and we talk, but we keep it very specific to cleaning up the sheet and going through it and keeping it very focused, and then setting up another meeting with the design team, the architects. I don't know that we need the mechanical group to then go through all of that stuff in terms of scope for Old Town Hall. There'd probably be a lot to do in one night.
Yeah, I was just thinking about initiating a conversation so we can, they might say, hey, there's a lot we can do here and simplify it for your presentation for next Wednesday night. And that might give us a good grasp on what we would be presenting to town meeting in May.
Yeah, I think it's just helpful for us to be part of that effort to better understand what's in there, rather than then just clean up a sheet and email it over to us. I mean, it was kind of an urgent thing to get it from Steve on Friday, because we felt like we were going into the gauntlet on Monday, and so there wasn't much time for anything else, and that meeting had already gotten pushed once. So
I think all the boards are pretty stressed right now before the town meeting. They're all trying to fit their different groups in that they need to review, with a lot of stuff going on. Who would like to initiate the presentation to advisory board? Crickets.
I am traveling that day.
I can't go that day either.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mark and Gert, you want to do that?
Garrett, if you go, I'll go.
Just confirm, which day are we talking about? Because are we talking about next week or the following week?
Next, the 16th, Wednesday.
16th.
Oh,
Okay.
hold on.
How about you, Phil?
I like having different faces in front of these groups.
How about you, Phil?
Our faces have been in front of them. Either one of you want to initiate it? Happy to support. I think it's going to be pretty much.
I'm happy to go and I can participate. Candidly, I think that Mark does a very good job of explaining the differences between the approaches and bringing the contractor at risk. I mean, I think that just sort of falls well within your area of expertise, Mark. And I just think that in terms of putting our best foot forward, you're probably the best person to do that. And I know that means a lot of stuff falls on you, but that's candidly where I feel like where we are. So unfortunately, I don't want to
I'm
nominate
humble.
you.
I'm humbled in one. I'm humbled in one respect. I just, again, I want to make sure we can get this cleaned up by then, and I don't want Vertex to just do it, because I think that we got to ultimately have buy-in to what's being put on this document, and I think just telling Vertex to clean it up and throwing them a couple of comments through email is, I don't think it's the most constructive and best way to approach it, especially if I've got to explain it a day later, and don't really get a chance to. If I'm just reading off of something, I don't really understand. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm looking at one line on here and I don't even know what it means. Owner testing, why does it say channels? It says CH17, construction materials and testing. I don't know what the CH means, 17 means.
Mark, we're not asking them to change numbers here.
No, but I would want to be able to explain the logic of and agree to the logic.
But if you're able to group the, what did you just mention there? Contingent of the owner's profit. If that profit line doesn't belong there and it goes up into the other group, isn't that what we're looking for, as opposed to really changing numbers and knowing every specific line?
Well, we gotta have buy-in on on what these numbers are, right? Because right now, I don't fully think we're set up to succeed with the numbers. I mean, if we're showing a grand total of $16 million and we don't have a single dime in there for an owner contingency, I think we're right there. We're setting ourselves up for failure. So if we're communicating externally to the other committees within the town that we have a grand total of $16 million, and we haven't added in some other key contingencies, then I think that's a problem.
So you are talking about changing the numbers.
I'm talking in that case, yes, I'm talking about adding a number and yes. And some of these other things, I'd like to understand their logic. So,
And how was it when you went through capital budget on this? Did you show them this?
we did show them it. We didn't go line by line because it's 2 pages long. So
Yeah.
we tried not to get into the weeds of it because we didn't want it to be an audit. We pulled it up on the screen, we scrolled through it fast, and then we turned it off.
Well, don't you think, I mean, at least my thought is that capital budget is more interested in numbers than advisory will be. I mean, they want to know that we've gone through it. You can show them the numbers like you did capital budget, and not go into detail, but then talk about where we are for the May and then November town meetings. And the CM at risk, obviously.
But I mean, other than Brian on the capital budget, there wasn't appreciation, or it didn't perceive to me that there was appreciation of the detail that went into the budget. It was really the displeasure of the number at the very end.
Sure.
So
Sure.
Again, I mean, they're not considering the thought and the detail and the work that went into getting there. They're just sharing their displeasure for that grand number.
Michelle has texted, her microphone is officially broken, but she wants you to know that she can set up a meeting or a call with John for Monday to walk through the numbers.
Okay. All right, let's do that.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Carolyn. Okay, so we'll go from there. And then if you want to chat on Tuesday or Wednesday, Mike, Gert, and myself, if you want to do a phone tag.
Tuesday, I'm going to be on a different planet. I have jury duty.
Oh,
wow.
fun. Good for you.
Lucky guy.
As if I'm not doing enough civic duty here. Now I got to go put somebody behind bars.
I was on the grand jury for 3 months a couple of years
Oh
ago.
my
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I
Joanne.
don't want to
Never
share
been
my
on a
thoughts
jury.
on this town meeting as we're being recorded, but
Yeah. Okay, I think we can leave it there, right? We'll set up a meeting with Vertex call on Monday. And then it sounds like Wednesday during the day, we can chat, do some texting, see when the best time is to get a call between the three of us and be prepared for Wednesday night. I did ask Mary if there's anything specific advisory wanted, and she said she'd get back to me if there was. I haven't not heard back from her, but if there's something different, we can talk about that on Wednesday. So I don't have anything else. Anybody else?
no, just one thing that I was educated in the fact that Jason Federico is all done with the town of Cohasset.
Really?
I think his last day is either today or tomorrow, Michelle.
Wow.
Oh, you're kidding.
So
That's a bummer.
I don't know. Jason's been a great help to us, and
Yeah.
will be
Wow.
will be a
Corporate
missed
memory.
resource. So,
Hmm.
the 24th, Michelle says, the 24th.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so he's not gone yet. So again, it sounds like he's around till the
He's
24th.
not dead yet.
But
So
yeah,
sad.
he's been a great help to us. So
Yeah.
thanks to Jason. And wish him luck.
Yeah, amen. Bummer.
Okay, great. Thank
And
you
if,
for
and if Michelle considers ever leaving, we'll all hunt her down.
that. We know where she lives.
We will come and find you. We will get that microphone working and we will come and find you.
Okay, if nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
So
adjourn.
moved.
Thank you all.
All right.
Productive. Thanks very much. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.